There we go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you so much. This is a little time we have before our guest arrives. She's due anytime, but we don't start officially till 7 o'clock. So this is just some things that I wanted to talk to you about. So good evening. This is the DAR Library Book Club. And for all of those of you who are Star Wars fans, I have to do it. I have 2 sons. May the 4th be with you. I had to do it. I had to. I couldn't live in my house if I didn't. I am Cindy Sweeney, Librarian General. And tonight we're going to talk about this wonderful book. And the slide, please. There it is. Betsy Ross and the Making of America. And our author is, of course, Marla Miller. And just some information. You have some buttons. If you look on the bottom of your screen, there's one that says Q&A. If you have any questions tonight, please type them in there. Okay, that's where the questions go. That's what Colleen will be monitoring for me to make sure that I address all your questions. There is a chat, and that's for comments if you want to make to somebody else. We won't be watching that very much. So please, please, please use the Q&A. That's what we'll be watching. Now, does everybody understand the difference between the two? Q&A if you want a question to the author. Chat if you just want to talk to someone online. They might not see it, but we're going to be focused on the Q&A. So I do have a prize tonight. The DAR Library Book Club was created to focus on nonfiction books from the time colonial through Federalist periods. And that's our time frame. Now, you local clubs, you can choose your own books. You can read the ones we do. You can add to them. Please comment about anything you're reading on our Facebook page. And this is our prize that we're going to have. It's a picture of the pin, the America 250 pin, and you will see it on many badges, I hope, during this time frame. And on the chapter master report, that infamous CMR, under the librarian portion, which I hope every region reports, book club program will count as a program for your chapter only if you talk about the DAR library. So to be official, if anyone is counting tonight's meeting as a program for your chapter, or you're going to use the recording for the program for a chapter, I will do something about the DAR library. And guess what we're celebrating? It's our 125th anniversary. So I was going to have a cupcake with a candle, and then I didn't bake today. So I do have a candle, which I'm going to light. There it goes, to celebrate our birthday. And you can see it. There's the light. I'll just hold it up for you. So can you see it? There it is. There it is. And I'm going to make a wish. And I bet you can bet what my wish is going to be. And I'm going to blow it out. So that happy birthday is official. And this evening's fact, we have to have a fact. The first librarian general was Dr. Anita Newcomb McGee. And you can see she will be attending Continental Congress. She has her own cutout. And all of you can do a cutout of yourself or someone from your chapter or somebody that you want to honor. I'm also doing one about Mrs. Cook, who is our only President General from Pennsylvania. So you can do that. And you might even do it for someone who will never get to Congress but would love to. Cutouts are the way to go. But anyway, here's tonight's question. And this is the only time you can use the chat. We only have about 39 people here, so you have a really good chance on this one. Here's the question. Put your answer in the chat. In what year was the DAR library officially a part of DAR? We're going to be watching the chat. And from the Adams-Onis Treaty Chapter DAR to all panelists, it was 1865. Wonderful. If that person could put in her name too, so I can write down the name, so I can send you the pin. Brittany Jenkins. Okay, Brittany Jenkins. Thank you. You are really on top of it. And I will mail that pin to you. So see how easy that was to do? And just talk a little bit about the DAR library. And what time is it? Let me look at my clock.
It's 6:53.
6:53. So we have 7 minutes. There are lots of things you can talk about with the DAR library. For example, the 4 locations, 44 librarians general. I'm the current one, and I will be serving, of course, with our fabulous, fabulous President General Denise Doring Van Buren, who also has done a cutout. You know, you can do, they have a pet patio. Did you know that? Our dog Deacon, who did pass away, so he's an angel, but he's wearing my son's doctoral robes when he got his PhD in nuclear engineering. So you can do all kinds of things. I saw a cat today and a dog, and they were dressed really, I mean, you have to look at them. They're going to be so much fun.
I also believe that Mrs. Lemongello's flamingos will be making an appearance on the pet patio as well.
Yes, they will. They will be there. And of course, I've seen organizing regions of chapters, all kinds of attire. If you go onto the Facebook page, oh, George and Martha. Oh, yes, I saw somebody in the chat said that George and Martha, the flamingos, yes, they will be there. They are going to be so cute. Oh, there's some other people who knew it was 1896. But I mean, this is just a really, really great way, since we can't be there in person, to be there in spirit. Wouldn't it be wonderful? There are 3,000 seats. If we could fill every seat with a cutout, I think it'll be exciting. And she's not here yet. Okay, that's all right. What else can I tell you about the DR library? By the way, did you know, if you go into the DR library, and somebody mentioned Don Lemongello, Colleen, you did, the O'Byrne Gallery, which the Florida Daughters just did during her administration, that used to be the library for a while. If you go up to the CAR, the NOC, that was where the library was for a while. So we've moved around the building, but we're at home where we are, and I can't wait till we can all get back there. Wait till you see signs. I don't have any pictures of signs, but it is gorgeous, and they're starting to put it back together. It's going to be wonderful, just wonderful. Let's just look at the next slide, okay, please. For those of you who aren't on Facebook or didn't have time to read it, before she gets here, I just wanted you to have some information about Dr. Miller. She's written many other books, 4 other books. I can't imagine that many books. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, you can donate books to the DR library to celebrate. I wanted to show you this book. This is from our President General. This is what she did during the pandemic. So yes, there are lots of books. And I see Dr. Miller's here with us now.
Hello.
Yes. Hi, I don't know if you can see the screen, but we have your books listed except for one. And look at all those accolades.
Wow.
I have to say, I'm not going to read them all, but very impressive. And may I call you Marla?
Yes, of course. Yeah, please do.
Okay. Please call me Cindy. So we're looking at all your many, many accolades. They're wonderful, absolutely phenomenal. You're so young to have so many, as a matter of fact.
That's a lot of good times is what I see on that list, you know, fun things I got to do.
Looking at that list, quick question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask you. Which one did you enjoy the most?
Of the books?
No, of your accolades.
Oh, of the accolades? Oh,
which one did you say, I can't believe it happened to me?
It's got to be the Star Center. Have you ever been to the CV Star Center or Chestertown, Maryland?
No, I haven't.
Chestertown is amazing, and that was to do this Betsy project, and I got the call for proposals, and I'll cross my desk on a day where I felt like I just need more time to work on this project, and I got the call, and it just was like, this is the perfect fit for this project, and I knocked out that application like in one sitting, like it all just fell together, and I got the fellowship, and we moved to Chestertown for the year.
Really?
And Chestertown is wonderful. It's on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's a very small college town. It's like, 4,000 people, but it's so charming. And because it's a little bit remote, people are very intentional about community. And so, there's just lovely festivals and book groups, and it's a really wonderful place to live. And we just enjoyed that to no end. So
What a
that's
great
probably
city.
top on my list.
Okay, I sound like that's a great one. Well, it's 6:58, so we're going to go to the next slide, if we may. This is the last of the slides, and then we're going to focus on Marla Miller. And this is Betsy Ross. Betsy Ross and the Making of America, which I learned a lot, I have to say. And it was a finalist for the Condell? How do I say that? Condell.
Yeah.
Prize in History, world's largest nonfiction historical literature prize. That's pretty big.
Yeah, that blew me away.
And it was Washington Post Best of 2010 list. And that's our last slide. So we can take those away so we can see you better. There you are. Hi.
Hello.
Good evening. And now it's official. It is 6:59. We're going to start. Our guest tonight, we do shine hands in DAR. Our guest tonight is Marla Miller, author of Betsy Ross, Making of America, which is fascinating. This was a great read. So my first questions, and there's a three-parter.
Yeah.
Okay. Why did you choose history as your passion? Why was your primary research interest focused on U.S. women's work before industrialization? And why Betsy Ross?
All good questions. Let's see. I was just raised up to be a historian. I don't think I ever really had any other choice. My mom is a very dedicated local historian in the town where we grew up, very interested in all things to do with our town and all things to do with our state. I grew up in Wisconsin. And so, my childhood was full of, country rides to look at historic cemeteries and historic buildings. And, mom was a collector or is a collector. And so we, had a house full of history. And so I always had an appreciation for history, I think, growing up, and always understood that when you studied history, it helped you understand why things are the way they are. It's just the answer to all the whys. Why does this look like this? Why does this look like that? And so, so it was always a fun field that I enjoyed researching in. And I think there's just something about the human connection to the people of the past that is powerful. So that's why I got into it. I think I never really considered doing anything else. Never had another major. And then I started doing women's work before industrialization, I think for a few reasons. I mean, like many people, I had some magical teachers in that area. So I was at the University of Wisconsin and took a class in early American poetry. And that professor was just mesmerizing. He could have said, I'm going to read the phone book today, and I would have been on the edge of my seat. I mean, he just was wonderful. And so I spent a lot of time taking classes with him in early American literature and other classes in early American history. And I came out to historic Deerfield in Western Mass as an undergrad to do a program that helped students sort out whether they were maybe interested in a museum career or a history career. And that project led me to the diary of Rebecca Dickinson, who was a never married, spinster is the word that they used in the 19th century, never married woman from early America. And I had the opportunity to study her diary, which is just this wonderful, magical text about what it's like to be unmarried in a culture that didn't really have a role for women outside marriage and family. And so, so I took that on to be my senior thesis as an undergraduate, and then it became my master's thesis. And I needed to understand in the course of that project how she supported herself. And so there's evidence in her diary that she worked as a gown maker, so I had to figure that out. And so, I went to the library and thought I'd just find all the books about 18th century gown making, and naturally found out there aren't any books about 18th century gown making, or at that time, not that I could find. And so, that's a long time ago. And so I started looking into her career, and somebody had, she lived in a town called Hatfield, Massachusetts. And somebody, another influential mentor for me, had pointed out that there's a historic house museum directly across the Connecticut River from where Rebecca Dickinson lived. And that woman left a substantial diary. Her name's Elizabeth Porter Phelps. And so I checked the Phelps diary to see if Dickinson comes up. And indeed, Dickinson was there working for her. And so were 60 other working women from early Hadley. And so that's what really led me into it. I just wanted to understand that world, like who are all these people who are making the world turn in 18th century Hadley. So that was how I got into it. I was kind of smitten by this world of working women.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that. And then Betsy, right? Part
Yes,
3.
right.
So my first book was about those women. I wrote a book about women in the needle trades called The Needle's Eye, Women in Work in the Age of Revolution. And in the writing of the introduction to that book, I wanted that book makes an argument about women in craft in early America. And it points out that to that point in time, that came out in 2006. At that time, when people talked about early American women's work, they mostly were talking about domestic work in the home. And when they talked about craft, they were mostly talking about men's work as cabinet makers and silversmiths and that kind of thing. And I knew from what I was seeing in this diary that women worked in skilled crafts, but there wasn't a lot of scholarship at the intersection of those areas. And so I thought, well, that's something I want to talk about in this Needle's Eye project. And it makes an argument that women in the clothing trades were skilled craftswomen. And so in the intro, I just wanted to make a passing remark about why it is that this giant industry in early America, one of the main ways that women earned livings, had been so kind of well and truly forgotten in popular culture. And so I talk a little bit about Colonial Barbie, which is one of my favorite historical artifacts. And then I wanted to make a passing comment about Betsy Ross because I knew that the real Elizabeth Ross in Philadelphia was an upholsterer, but she's remembered in popular culture as a seamstress. And so, I kind of wanted to think about, what it is about women making furniture that's hard to reconcile with popular historical imagination. And so all I wanted to do is say that. And then in a footnote, I would cite like what I assumed to be the many books about Betsy Ross. And when I went to look that up, and I looked for her in a database called WorldCat that some people may be familiar with, I found like 200 titles, the vast majority being children's literature, little books that imagine Betsy Ross growing up, and just a handful of more substantive work, and really nothing that looked to connect to the story of Betsy Ross to the scholarly literature, to what historians had been writing about Philadelphia and the Revolution and women's work and all those things. And I could hardly believe it. And so like that moment, I kind of knew my next book is going to be about Betsy Ross. I spent my career as a public historian. I like to think about how popular audiences think about the past. And so it was a project that connected the part of my brain that thinks about public history with the part of my brain that thinks about labor history. So it was just kind of falling into it really, but I just have never had a better time.
Well, we're glad you fell into it. Believe me. So I have a quote from you in your book. Betsy Ross shows us the revolution at its geographic and political nucleus, the streets of Philadelphia from the perspective of a woman whose family ties put her a handshake away from the revolt's epicenter, but who nonetheless remained a working daughter, sister, wife, mother, aunt, and grandmother before, during, and long after the political drama subsided. So this is my question. Betsy Ross is a thread that you've woven through this tapestry of time in American history. How do you write? You start, but how do you research? How do you decide how much to include? Because there's such a wealth. How did you choose?
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. Thank you for that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I'm teaching a course this semester on the art and craft of biography. So I've been talking about this a lot with my students. Betsy left almost no papers. So my strategy had to be, kind of this life and times and to put her in context. And so I would say my first steps were twofold. And one is to look at the affidavits that her family left and see where I could push, see what I could, if I push at that, do they lead me down some roads that are productive? And then also because she didn't leave that much, but she came from such a big family, these 17 brothers and sisters, not to mention, all the other people. I kind of took the point of view that what happens to our families are things that kind of happen to us, and that I would pursue those queries and kind of see what I could discover by learning about her sisters, learning about her brothers, learning about her aunts and uncles, and all this extended family. And that helped a lot, I think. Like, my strategy was kind of, if I can shine a very bright light on her sister, can I see her in the background? If I shine a bright light on her aunt, can I see her in the background? And think about where she might have been positioned to those stories. So that was kind of the strategy, but also just thinking that, all of that illuminates the world that she lived in. And so they're all telling me something about her, even if it's indirect. But I often say, like, that book is long. I appreciate your, your group that has all tackled it. And I always say, if they had given me another year to work on that book, it would have been shorter and better, probably. But you spend so much time, like, you don't know what you're going to find in the archive. So you dig up all these stories. Well, then you don't want to leave any of it out, because it all seems, I got very invested in members of her family. Her sister, Rebecca, I got very invested in Rebecca and her nieces and nephews. And, she becomes, it's more of a, if it were a Hollywood thing, it would be more of an ensemble cast, if I were going to turn this into a movie, than a leading lady kind of thing.
Well, you've talked about her family. So Betsy Ross is the name that we use, but it's Elizabeth, Griskam, Ross, Ashburn, Claypool. How much artisan history can be in one name? Would you share a little about her family's contributions to the actual building of Philadelphia, which was the epicenter of the American Revolution?
Yeah, the book is called Betsy Ross and the Making of America for a reason. Like, again, I'm coming at this not as a political historian, but as a social historian and a labor historian. And so I really want to think about all the people who literally made that city. And so, like, that's why the book opens with Andrew Griskam. And I really think, I think she walked those streets and knew he built that, my dad built that, my dad built that. Like, I really feel like that was probably pretty tangible for her. And then of course her brother is a silversmith, and she's got three of those sisters are all in the upholstery trades. And so they're fabricating all of the domestic interiors for people all around the city. And, I feel confident, although I don't have any letter or diary where people express these kinds of thoughts, but I feel confident that they, artisans know, like, we know this today, right? If any of you are makers yourselves, like, I'm a knitter. I know who in my crowd, like, are the real, like, she's got the goods. Like, if I needed to solve a problem, this person really knows, or this person is really skilled. I have other friends who are skilled quilters, skilled embroiderers, things like that. Like, who this talent is in your universe. And I just feel confident that Betsy and her whole family, as a family of artisans, brought that sensibility to the way that they moved through the city. And they knew, like, when they were in a space, oh yeah, I know who made that, that looks great. Or, those pleats, I don't know, I think that they brought that eye to the city as they moved through it.
Okay. Very contributors, major contributors. Absolutely.
Well, yeah.
Some of the names. Betsy Ross outlived 3 husbands. I found, we just know Betsy Ross,
right?
But 3 husbands, not to mention children, family members. You researched so much about her. You said in the book that she never knew what it was to want employment. What do you believe gave her the strength to continue being a productive individual when so many others crumbled? What made her special?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I should say all biographers, I think, to some extent invent their subjects, right? You're choosing from the archival record, and you're seeing what you choose to see to some extent. And it's especially true with someone like Betsy, who left no papers. I mean, when I started that project, I think I say this in the book, that when I started the research, there was one letter known to be by her that by the time I was in the research was already lost. No one, you know, like it could no longer be located. So the evidentiary record is very thin, you know, very thin. So you have to think about what you're seeing. And so what your question brings to my mind is that when I was doing the research, you have to think about the meaning of things that aren't necessarily words. So for instance, I tell the story in the book about her older sisters who are disowned for marrying outside of unity with the Quaker community. And then when it comes to, you know, Betsy's turn, she marries John Ross. He's worships at Christ Church, like it's a no-no. But when the Quaker community comes to her to see if she wants to undertake the, you know, long structured process that it is involved in repairing that relationship, she's just like, no, I'm good. You know, and it's her sisters, you know, drag that out over a long period of time. But Betsy's like, you know, no, I've made my decision. I'm fine. And similarly, when she marries John Claypool, you know, again, this is statistical, you know, make of it what you will, but statistically, when women were widowed at that time in Philadelphia, other people's research told me, it was like 2 years might lapse between your widowhood and remarriage. Just it's a statistic. This is the way people generally did it. And of course, when Betsy marries Claypool, it's very fast. You know, it's more like months than years. So I take that and I take the stat about the, you know, the way she dealt with the disownment. And what I interpret those facts to mean is that she's a decisive person. She isn't one to ponder or dilly-dally. I always say, I don't know if you've done a Myers-Briggs personality assessment or if any of your folks have, but they're fun. When I did one, I learned that I'm pretty much balanced on 3 of the 4 dualities, but one of them is about decision making. J is very decisive and P is very much about process and thinking. And I'm off the charts J. And I think Betsy is off the charts J. Like she's just, she met Claypool, she's ready to have a family. She's been widowed twice. She's got a baby girl and, they connect and she's like, yeah, let's go. So I see that through her. I see a certain, decisive, determined quality that emerges from that thin body of evidence. So, make of it as you will, but I think she just saw what needed to be done and she did it. Like that's what I see in her choices. I don't have narrative evidence of that, but that's what I see in the choices that she made.
Oh, I would think because 3 husbands willing to go on, she had to be determined and decisive. Oh, and that's shown through the book, You mentioned the Quaker Church. Her continual ins and outs are fascinating. Her immediate family and her family through marriage are intertwined with this church. Was it faith, politics, survival, or security? What was that relationship with the church?
Yeah, that is such a good question. Again, I'm doing a lot of inferring in that. Her family had a lot, there's a lot of disownment in her family history. So clearly there's evidence in the culture of her family that people are, resisting a little bit some of the rules that surround the Quaker faith. And then as I say, like she married John Ross and, was ready to, she didn't work to repair that relationship at that time. But then later when the Free Quaker community comes together, she's part of that. And she and John Claypool both are part of that. And so there's something about that too, that makes me think that the tenets of the faith appeal to her. They continue to appeal to her. What the Free Quakers reject in the larger ethos of the Quaker community is the principle of disownment itself. And the idea that you can stand in judgment of your fellow man. And so I like to think that that's evidence that Betsy embraced all of the very appealing qualities of the Quaker faith. You know, I certainly found that to be so when I learned more about it. But that this idea that you can sit in judgment of others, you know, she did not care for that. And the free Quaker community, you know, of course, did not embrace that tenet. And so, you know, that makes perfect sense when she saw like how her older sisters had been treated and other members of her family. Like there's a lot of disownment that she was familiar with, and that, you know, she did not adhere to. So I feel like that also, like, talk about what we know about her. Again, looking at the decisions she made, one can infer things about her value system.
Well, we do have a question, and I don't want to skip it. Susan says, it would seem that as a skilled craftsperson, she was not dependent on a husband for financial support, yet she married 3 times.
Yeah, I love that question, right? So a different historian could say that is evidence that she was not independent, that, you know, like she just couldn't go without a husband and she married the first guy who showed up. Another historian could have written that book and written that. So you know, you have to sort of own what you know, the choices you make as an author. Again, I see it as a more decisive issue. I mean, when she's widowed with John Ross, she's a very young woman. So obviously she's going to remarry. Very little is known about Ashburn. And so it's hard to really, it's hard for me to make sense of that altogether, just because we know just almost nothing about him. But that union does give her a family. You know, she has her first daughter. So one can imagine that she's eager to start a family, and that Ashburn is, you know, a husband who seems like that'll happen. And then of course the war comes and he dies abroad, and then John Claypool shows up. And I like to think, I mean, everything I've read about John Claypool, I used to call him my history boyfriend. Like, he just seems so appealing. Like, he's a man too who had a hard life. You know, he was in prison with, as you all know, her second husband when he died. But the way he is described by the people who remember him is just, you know, he was warm and twinkly and quick with a joke, quick with a song. And one can easily imagine, you know, her war years were not easy. She was there in occupied Philadelphia with a child and no form of, you know, no husband helping to pay the bills. And so I like to think that he just brought the relief that everybody was seeking in the, you know, in the peace, that now here's this, you know, completely appealing man to finally have the family and the stability. And of course they have all of their daughters together, and it sort of gave her the household that perhaps she was seeking. So that's how I tend to read it, but I will say another person could interpret it differently.
Well, I have to say, when I read it, and he was with her husband, her second husband, when he died, and he came back to see her, I kind of thought he was a man with a plan.
Yeah, I like that.
He was a man with a plan. Here's a woman who already has one child ready to rock and roll. I thought, that's a man with a plan. Yeah. You know, that's what I thought. Yeah. Just, you know, just a little different viewpoint there.
Yeah, I like
it. So I do have my little Betsy Ross flag here. I'm one of those few people that she goes down to her basement and says, which flag do I need? I love flags. What was the importance and need for flags?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, at that time, one of the questions I get asked all the time is did she feel honored being asked to make the first flag? So I always want to explain to people that, you know, at this moment in time, flags are just, they're devices, they're communication devices, you know, and they're mostly at sea. And so, you know, if you need to know at a distance who they are, the flag will tell you that. And so ships at sea all needed suites of flags to communicate across distances. So that's really, you know, that's really what they're for. And that season, you know, where it's recorded, you know, in family legend that she's approached to make that flag, the Pennsylvania Navy is being created. You know, the Continental Congress is saying, yeah, let's get some ships. So women all around the city are getting those contracts to make flags. And, you know, that would have been completely in the wheelhouse of an upholstery seamstress's, big flat textiles, sturdy seams. You know, it makes perfect sense to me that she would have been approached like all of those other women who, you know, were approached. And also, you know, this is the season that John Ross has just died. Here she is, a young woman wondering how she's going to, you know, get an income in war. You know, during war, people are not thinking about upholstery. So I always like to invite people to imagine her as Betsy Ross, government contractor. You know, she is looking around, people are getting those contracts. She would like to be on the list of makers. So I feel like that's, you know, that's what she was thinking about. They're going to need a lot of these. And so, you know, this is a good revenue stream.
Okay, this is an off the cuff question because I did look up her 5-pointed flag. Did you make one? Did you?
Oh my God, I'm so bad at it. And Carol, oh my God, so I've become quite friendly with the folks at the Betsy Ross House, who are amazing. And if you have a chance to get to the Betsy Ross House, you should go there. And Carol Spate, who portrays Betsy Ross, she's the lead interpreter, just makes it look so easy. And then I try to do it, and it just looks like a 4-year-old tried to do it. So yeah, it's easier said than done.
Thank you, because I had trouble. So I do thank you for that. And I have to interject here too, that we in Pennsylvania have a Flag House chapter, and they have a Naturalization Day at the Betsy Ross House. So many Pennsylvania daughters have been there and met her. So we're strong supporters. So we're talking about Betsy Ross and Who Made America. Names mentioned, and these were all new names to me: Anne King, Rebecca Flower Young, Cornelia Bridges, and Margaret Manny. Can you give us a snapshot of these women, their skills, their materials, their entrepreneurship, their ability to continue working? And this what gets me: through a revolutionary war, a pandemic, the War of 1812, politics, economics. How'd they do it?
Yeah. Well, you know, what choice did they have, really? You know? And so a lot of these women, like some of those women had other skills. And, you know, again, the war comes, and they're probably not going to be practicing the trade that they had been practicing, but how could these skills be used in the war effort? We see that all the time. You know, the World War II comes and Detroit shifts to wartime production. Like, this is what we do. And so I think all of those women were taking skills that they had, mostly in related, obviously associated trades that involved sewing and textiles, and turned it toward the war effort. Anne King is one of my favorite people, because who thinks about, you know, being a specialist in the making of tassels in any period? And we all know a lot, you know, we, like in our kind of thumbnail knowledge of the revolution, we think about the non-importation movement. And here's Anne King, who had the care of women's work at Betsy's shop, putting out ads saying she is the foremost tassel maker in the colonies. Like, you know, well, there's a thing, you know. So I got very involved for a while there in learning how to make tassels and understanding what that work also is. But yeah, no, I think those women, you know, they're just trying to get through. They're just trying to get food on the table every week. And so certainly in the war, they're making those flags. You know, Betsy and others, you know, made munitions for the armory during the war. And then the War of 1812 is just, it's the same thing. You know, as you all know, the best evidence of Betsy's flag making comes in the run up to the War of 1812. And so, so they're, you know, they're challenges that are facing the community, but, you know, these women all have to do what they have to do. You know, I get asked a lot whether it's unusual for women to have had trades in that period, and it's not at all unusual. And you know, most women had some occupation. They were shopkeepers or tradeswomen or whatever it was, but there are all these activities to generate income.
Well, especially at a time when women really didn't have many rights. How did they keep the business flowing?
Yeah, well, I point this out all the time. There's one and only one advertisement that I recall from the Philadelphia papers for Betsy's upholstery shop. But if you didn't know this whole story, you would never see it because it's John Claypool, upholsterer.
Mhm.
And, John Claypool was not an upholsterer, but of course, in that time period, women's economic and political identity are covered by the identities of their husband, which is another reason you have to marry well, because this person is going to take charge of, your resources. And so, I've forgotten where I was going with all that, but, women did have to, they were all doing all those things, whether or not, like sometimes it looks to us like this was male activity, but it's all female activity. It's just because it was men's financial and political identities that were the official identities. We just, the record covers a lot of that. Another place that we see that I see a lot in my work is apprenticeship contracts. Women didn't need a contract because they didn't have to prove the things that a contract proves. And so we have a lot of apprenticeship contracts for men, which doesn't mean that women didn't do apprenticeships. And in the records I've seen, they refer to themselves as apprentices. They refer to other people as their apprentices. They refer in the past tense, oh, I knew her when I was an apprentice, or she was an apprentice. But they don't have the contracts that historians started to look to for evidence of that work because they didn't need to. So, the absence of those records doesn't mean that activity wasn't happening. It just means it's harder for us to see it.
Okay. Here's another question from Beth Ramus. Most of our history tells of the decision makers. This biography is definitely a her story. Did you know that your working would reveal how hardworking these working class women of the period were?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. Thank you. And it's so well phrased. I think that if you'd have asked me, I would have said, oh, sure, sure, that's what it was. But I really don't think I would have appreciated it in the same way that I came to appreciate it once you're in the documents. Like when you see Betsy starting work as a teenager and working almost until, 80, and, there's a, I don't know, there's a steel to that I really came to appreciate. And all of the sisters all doing the same thing. Her sister who worked for the cloth dyeing, her own family's cloth dyeing and scouring firm, all the girls being upholsterers and all the women that Betsy knew. You just come to appreciate that at a whole different level. The dailiness of it, the grind of it, the pressure of it, the fear of losing it. I can't even imagine what occupied Philadelphia was like, the scarcity, trying to make sure that you're going to make ends meet. This is an era, of course, before there's any kind of safety net. You're not going to tap your bank account or use your credit card. It's all, what can I provide for my family now? And so I did really I found that to be so moving. I really came to appreciate that as a city of working women.
And they worked continually, dawn to dusk.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. It's another place and time, but this in Hadley, the woman that I write about here in Hadley, there's a great passage in her diary where she's kind of kicking herself for being so lazy because she slept into almost 5. And like, I don't sleep 5 o'clock unless I'm catching a flight. So it's just, we have a lot that we should appreciate about the work that we don't have to do, stoking fires and heating water.
And she not only worked for herself, there were so many of her family came to live with her, and she obviously taught the trade. Would you say she taught the trade?
Yes, for sure. And that's one of my favorite parts of the story. Like, when people come to the book, they tend to come to it because they're interested in that did she or didn't she story from her 20s. But the Betsy that I love the most is Aunt Claypool. you know, when she's older and she's got a house full of, you know, her kids and her grandchildren and her nieces, and everybody's working toward that flag business. And there's just something about that house on Front Street that, like, I'm especially fond of. And when I found those letters in the Historical Society of Pennsylvania where they talk about Aunt Claypool, like, in a way, she's the Betsy I love the most, because that's her kind of like having to be the anchor of her family as her sisters pass away. And, you know, she's got this business and she's got, you know, they've got a contract with the federal government and she's going to keep them together.
You talk about places where she lived. Did you go visit those places? Were you able to see Bessie was here?
You know, in hindsight, I wish I had done even more of it. At the front end of the project, I lived for 6 months in Philadelphia. And so I did a lot of the research then, but I was kind of in a mad frenzy to get the archival work done while I was in the city. And it really wasn't until the end of the project that I saw those spaces in the sort of 3D way that I needed to see them. So I wish I had done more of that at the end. Especially 2nd Street, where she and John, you know, started their married life. I wish I had spent more time in that neighborhood because it's fairly well intact. A lot of her neighborhoods are no longer intact. I mean, I talk in the book about the Cherry Street, you know, address where her life ended. That, you know, that's no longer standing. The waterfront, you know, where this Front Street house no longer standing. So, you know, some of those landscapes you can't see again, but that 2nd Street neighborhood, I think, is where you can really get a sense of it. And Arch Street too, although, you know, Arch Street changed a lot too, but I get the most sense of her on 2nd Street.
Okay. I wonder if her ghost is ever there. We took a ghost tour with our juniors and it's interesting. I always think that's interesting.
Yeah.
There's a twist in that Betsy Ross flag and the Fort McHenry flag production. It's almost ironic that these women knew each other.
Yeah, I love it. I love, you know, the whole of the 18th century is a small world. Like it, you know, it just is. So that's just a fun thing about it. But yeah, so in the, one of the fun discoveries of the book is when I sort of realized that, you know, Betsy, in the early 19th century, this woman, Rebecca Flower, had it locked down. Like the flag making contracts, you know, when the Schuylkill Arsenal needed flags, they went to Rebecca Flower. And they're roughly the same age and they have daughters roughly the same age. And as it happened, Betsy's daughter, Clarissa, moved down to Baltimore with her husband and they were going to start a life there. Meanwhile, Rebecca also had a daughter, Mary Pickersgill. And so all these women get widowed, basically, and they decide mother and daughter will join forces. But the Pickersgill decide that Rebecca will go to Baltimore. And the Claypools decide that Clarissa will come home to Philadelphia. And so this creates an opening for Betsy because Rebecca Flower, like there's sort of a vacuum in who's going to be making flags for the arsenal, which, you know, Betsy and her daughter Clarissa are happy to walk into. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Mary Pickersgill are in Baltimore, you know, and obviously they are there to fabricate the Star Spangled Banner. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of a, I don't know. I just love how those stories are all entwined. I never could find that I found a tiny whiff of evidence that they were aware of each other kind of as competitors, but it's a tiny whiff, but they just had to have been. They just had to have been aware of one another.
You would think. We were talking about all the people that were together. I mean, the names she knew: George Washington, Ben Franklin, Benjamin Rush. It was a world that was just so intertwined, intertwined. Speaking of Rush, because we read the book by Benjamin Rush by Stephen Freed. She didn't like Rush.
Yeah, I mean, apparently not. Like she disapproved of his approach to the epidemic and obviously, you know, had reasons to have strong feelings about that because it was, you know, so devastating for her own family. But yeah, I mentioned in the book, we got to see, so there was a museum exhibition at Winterthur around the book. And in the course of, looking for artifacts for that, we met with some of her descendants, and I got to see this medicine chest that is, supposed to be hers, and, sort of resonates with this family story about her being especially interested in healing, which, may just be a family legend, but it suggests a reason for them to keep that medicine chest. And so you wonder about,
Well, at that time, they didn't know what caused it or how to fix it and how to heal people. So she did some good work. I think. So yes, I think that something that I would like you to do, and I think I mentioned this to you in the book at the end. I would like your voice to read to us. I have it marked here. It's the last. It starts in my book on page 361, that last paragraph that goes over to 362. I thought that just really culminated in Betsy Ross. So please, we want to hear you read it.
I so appreciate this invitation, because I felt good about these words. So I'm glad that they resonated for you. So here it is. Betsy Griskam Ross Ashburn Claypool may indeed seem elusive, but her life nevertheless helps us contemplate the revolution and its aftermath in new ways. She's important to our understanding of American history, not because she made any one flag, however iconic that moment may have become, but because she was a young craftswoman who embraced the resistance movement with vigor, celebrated its triumphs, and suffered its consequences. Her life is significant not only for what it teaches us about the soldiers and sailors, assemblymen and privateers whose orbits traversed Betsy's own, but also for what it reveals about women who summoned the courage to dissent from their faiths and to challenge their government when they believed it had transgressed its bounds. Her story is worth knowing for what it tells us too, about the working women and men who built early America's cities, furnished its rooms, and clothed its citizens. Families who fomented, endured, and remembered the upheaval of the revolution. And lastly, she helps us imagine more ordinary times, the familiar cares of everyday life, and the pleasure taken in the simple comforts of beautiful and functional things made by capable hands.
Oh, that was lovely. I thank you for reading that. It just really encapsulated this wonderful, wonderful woman. So, would you go to lunch with her?
I would totally go to lunch with her. Like I say, I think of her as this, extremely hardworking and focused woman. I don't know, she might not take lunch. Maybe she works through lunch. But I really appreciate that. I think I've always appreciated people with a really strong work ethic. And certainly she has a very strong work ethic. So yeah, I would love to go to lunch with her. And, there are these tiny hints in her family memory that she was, she wasn't severe or a hard woman. Like we hear about these little jokes and little games. So I think she knew how to have fun, and also just knew how to get the job done. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I'd love to have lunch with her.
You said a little earlier that you met some of her descendants. What, besides the medicine chest, which I think to see that would have been fantastic. What did they share with you? Do they have a feeling of kinship with her, or is she just a historical person to them?
I loved meeting her family. They were fantastic. I mean, you can well imagine, some historian comes nosing around, and you can imagine that they would assume that the historian is there to debunk the myth of their ancestor. People, it's very fashionable to be too cool to be interested in Betsy Ross, so, I would not have been surprised in the least if they had just hung up the phone. But they didn't. They welcomed me with open arms. We went down, I was with Linda Eaton, who's the curator at Winterthur, and we were in basements and kitchens and, just seeing these cherished artifacts. but at the same time, they're very sophisticated about the story. They, understood it's probably not going to add up exactly the way the family legend had come. Nobody was upset that, I was going to complicate that story and try to say something, more subtle about their family story. They were fantastic. I got to tell you guys one thing, one of my favorite moments in that, which I hope you guys will enjoy. We went to visit a family descendant who was, we had heard had what they believed to be Betsy's sewing table. And so obviously we were going to want to see that. And we got to the person's house and we could see pretty quickly that, the table was too late to have been owned by her. And the owner was very cool about that, but mentioned that there were some other things that we might want to see. And one of them, she reaches into her kitchen closet, which is just like my kitchen closet, like full of stuff. And out of the back of it comes John Claypool's cane. And, again, he's already my history boyfriend. So I'm interested in anything to do with him. And I had been interested in, I had learned that he was reputedly disabled at the end of his life and he might have had a stroke. There's a lot of mystery about that, but he was somehow disabled to some extent. And that's about all I knew about it and didn't know really what to believe about it. But the cane is so wonderful. It's carved, and it's I've forgotten the wood, but it's a gift from his son-in-law, Isaac Silliman. Isaac is the father, not of John's children, but of the Eliza Ashburn that Betsy had. So already there's this lovely thing, like he's the stepfather of this little girl, and now she's married to this guy, and he's a ship captain. And when he's at sea, he's got some downtime. He carves this cane, and it's got the head of a dog on it. It's like more of a walking stick than a cane, really, I guess. And on it, it says, to JC from IS, that this gift, and it's got the year 1811. And that's all lovely because it's this token of appreciation between these men that I just find super moving. But then it also says like 74 South Front Street, which to me is like, if lost, please return, and so that told me that, yeah, he was using a cane in 1811, but it's also possible that he could forget it at the coffee shop or forget it at the tavern and get home without it. And then he wanted somebody to bring it back. And so like just this artifact opened up such a world to me. And it just was so lovely of this descendant to, to say, well, what about this? Like this, let me show you this thing. And it's my favorite artifact.
And you got to hold it.
Yeah, got to hold it.
Oh, see, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's exciting. We have a question here. I don't want to miss it. Would you share what the research process is for professional writers in working with archives?
Oh, sure. It's varied, I would say. Every archive is different. I started the project at the Quaker Archives at Swarthmore, and they're like the Quaker culture is very oriented toward record keeping. And so like that's a case where I go into an archive and the records are in apple pie order and they're indexed and it's very easy to find. And that's where I found all the early stuff. That's where I knew there was a book here because the account, that's the first thing I found was the accounts of the sisters being disowned and Betsy being disowned and like all of that. So that's one kind of experience. And then, I had to do a lot of work in the city archives, which are totally different. And, it's more hit and miss as to what will survive from the 18th century and how will you find it and how will you access it. Every archive is just its own thing. Sometimes it's very structured and you are brought one folder at a time and you look at that folder and you return that folder and then you get the next folder. And then other times you're left alone in the room with a box of records and, you get to kind of browse through them at will. So it's really different. It really depends on where you're working and just what their setup is. So.
With Betsy Ross, do you call her Betsy Ross or do you call her Elizabeth Griskam Ashburn?
Yeah.
I forgot Ross.
Right,
you just call her Betsy. You just call her Betsy.
Betsy Ross, probably. I mean, it's funny. I thought a lot about that in the course of the book because, of course, Betsy is this diminutive it doesn't always feel as respectful and that it has the gravitas that I mean to give her. But that's how she's known. I mean, I think that's just how she's recognized and known. I didn't find a lot of evidence that she was called that a lot in her day. But again, the evidentiary record is too thin to really speak to that. But I call her Betsy. I think a lot of historians refer to their subjects by, by their first names. And then when you're writing, you have to remember like, oh, now I'm in my formal mode. So you have to do things a little differently.
There was one thing in the book, and I have to say, this is how I remember her name. It's the word grace.
Yes.
Where did that originate?
I remember learning that in the first, there's a wonderful family. One of the family members wrote an excellent, very well-researched history called the Griskam Legacy. And it's in there. That's when I first learned about it. So I don't know where that family, story came from, but it came down with the rest of the family stories.
But that's the best way. You just take the E from the end. So it's Elizabeth and then Grace. Grisham, Ross, Ashburn, Claypole.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was that. I love, that's one of the tidbits that I will care for. So let's ask your opinion. This is your opinion.
Okay.
This is the flag.
Yep.
Betsy Ross was talented. She knew how to cut the 5 stars. She knew George Washington. She moved in those circles. Did she make the flag?
I'll tell you, you you might not like this answer because, of course, like everything, I'll qualify. I feel so when Betsy told that story to her daughter, and that's what we have, right? We have it's already an echo. We have what the family says she said. We don't have what she said. We have what her family said she said. And even then, what they think she said was not that I made the first flag. That is a story about her meeting George Washington, the father of our country, biggest celebrity that there could be, and that she taught him something. And so what I think at the nut of it, that is a story about the making of that star. It is not a story about the making of the flag. And there's no firstness in it. Like when she tells that story, she's not saying first anything. She's just wants to tell a story about Washington coming into her shop with this vision of a 6-pointed star and her showing him that a 5-pointed star, tapping her artisanal skill. A 5-pointed star, in my professional opinion, is a better design choice because if you're going to need a lot of these end fast, this is a superior design. So I think that is a story about her being at the top of her game and making a contribution that way. So when Frances Hopkinson bills for the making or the design of the first flag later, and is, that claim is not paid, there's this great line that says, a lot of people had a hand in that. And so that's what I want to say to people. Like there's no yes or no answer to that. A lot of people had a hand in that. I believe that she was one of them. Like there's no reason for me to doubt that story, that she came up with this idea that 5 points are better than 6. Already somebody had come up with the blue field and the white and red. Like nobody claims that she came up with that. And so like already this was a process. Somebody had started a process. Here's an idea, and there'll be these stars in this canton, and here's what we're thinking. And then she said, well, I have a tweak, then, later she's very proud of that. So I have no reason to doubt that. A lot of people had a hand in that. Somebody had the idea for the design. The 6-pointed star that you have, or the circle that you have there, I was never able to find why, when did we start thinking that that's the Betsy Ross flag? I don't know. There's nothing that I could find that told me that at that moment we're talking about stars in a circle. And of course, the flag during the Revolution has all kinds of configurations. There's no one thing. And so I don't even know where that part of it comes from. Like, that's not part of her story. She didn't say, oh, and when I put them on here, how about a circle? Like that's not part of the story. So I think I would gravitate toward that anyway. It's a lot of people all contributing to this effort, and everybody's got their part of it. And there's no reason to box her out of this one part. So I'm always trying to convince people of that. There's another good story. I think I tell this in the book about, who built the first brick house in Philadelphia. Every claim of first and biggest is wrong, like basically. Because as I talk about in the book, there's one guy who was the owner of the first house, the carpenter of the first house and the bricklayer of the first house. They can all make the claim that they built the first brick house. Like, what do we do with that? And so I think as readers and as historians, we have to always be skeptical of those first claims, because they're always more complicated than that. So
the first sewing machine, the first light bulb, the first car.
Yeah, all of that.
We always say who gets the best publicity is the one we remember.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, then, this flag, my little flag here,
Yep.
that the flag is a team, just as like building our country was a team. But you think, and I'm thinking that way too, that 5-pointed star that we all love is Betsy Ross.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, in a way, why would you make that up? This, like, if you think about that, it's not, you hear people talk about, that there's something to be gained by inventing that story. But, honestly, when she starts telling that story to, her children, it's, she dies in 1836. It's in the 1820s and 30s. I've talked about this in other settings, but one of the things that really interests me is the intersection. Like, the real hero of the story is Clarissa Wilson, her daughter, because it's Clarissa who heard those stories as a girl. She worked alongside her mother all those years. And when she's getting ready to leave Philadelphia to move to the Midwest, she sits down this nephew and says, this story shouldn't be lost. And this is the decade when we start to see the first histories of the Revolution, the first histories of Philadelphia in the Revolution, the first histories of women in the Revolution. And those books talk about all kinds of women that family knew, local women who did big things. And I think Clarissa looked at those books that are coming out and thinking, well, my family has a story too. And so she sits Canby down and wants him to hear it, like really hear it. And then, she moves away and the Civil War comes and people have other things that they have to be thinking about. And then he circles back to that, later to remember that story and do the research he had kind of started before the war. So it's really Clarissa we have to thank for wanting to be sure that this story about her family and their contribution to the effort just doesn't get lost.
Well, I think we have to thank you for this book. Look that's how I read it.
I love that.
That's how I learned. This has been a wonderful story about Philadelphia, about the time, but also most importantly about a woman who, against the odds, look at what was thrown at her. 2 wars, yellow fever, price gouging, people leaving the city, her coming back. What a woman. What a woman. And I think that this country of ours was made by work of those women. And I thank you. I think everybody thanks you. I have to say, we always have problems, but I've been watching the numbers. Nobody's leaving.
Oh. Well, I appreciate that. I was so happy to be invited to speak with you guys. I always have a good time when I speak to the DAR, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed the book, and it's super fun for me to get to talk about it with you.
It's wonderful. Do you have another book on the horizon?
Oh, well, this will surprise you. I just finished a book. So I'll mention a couple of things because some people might be interested. I published a very short book on Rebecca Dickinson, who, if Claypool is my history BFF or my history boyfriend, she's my history BFF. She is the never married woman from Hatfield that I talked about. And so that's a little slim book. And I just finished a book called Entangled Lives, Labor, Livelihood, and Landscapes of Change in Massachusetts, which is about women and work in right here in Western Mass where I live. So it's local history, but it aims to shine a light at the sort of bottom-up world of women and work here in New England. But my next project is going to be on the letters to Gloria Steinem.
Really?
20 years ago, before I came to UMass, I had the great privilege of being the archivist to process her papers when they were donated to Smith College. And so that's a revolution of another sort, but those letters are mesmerizing. And so,
really?
So my plan is to turn to them.
So we have this to look forward to.
Indeed.
Coming up. People have been saying, wonderful, love this. Thank you, Marla. You presented about your Betsy Ross book at the Boston Tea Party chapter DR meeting on Boston Tea Party Day, December 16th, a few years ago. I
had a fabulous time. That was fantastic.
Yes. So DAR is known to you, and we are so appreciative. Would love, wish we could meet you in person. I'm trying to read these. Everyone's thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh.
And somebody thought of her mother as she read Betsy Ross.
Wait, say that again?
Someone thought of her mother as she read Betsy Ross. As you know, mothers, everyone's saying thank you, thank you. All these are coming in. So everyone has really enjoyed. They enjoyed reading the book. This is about a wonderful woman, more depth than a flag, more depth than a flag. So I thank you. Oh, these things keep coming in, and I feel like I have to read them. Everyone, it's just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I mean, again, I so appreciate the invitation. I was looking forward to this all week. I just knew it would be the highlight of my week, and it has been. So thank you.
Well, you've been the highlight of ours. Thank you for Betsy Ross, Making of America. And we're going to look for your next. Oh, wait, someone's raised her hand. I don't know why she's raising her hand. Oh, they want an encore. We want to go to lunch. We want to go to lunch with you.
Oh my God. Well, when the world lets us all gather again, we'll do it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I hope you noticed a bump in sales because everybody did you, I hope, but a lot of people read it, and thank you so much. It's been a wonderful evening for us, and we'll look for your next book. And thank you for Betsy Ross and the Making of America.
Thank you too.
Good
night, everybody. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.